Anna Silva strode down the bustling corridor of O'Hare International Airport. Her captain's stripes crisp on her sleeve, a silent badge of the 20 years she'd spent mastering the sky. The evening sun splashed the terminal windows in deep shades of orange and purple, casting her uniform in a glow that mirrored the mix of exhaustion and satisfaction she felt. The rhythmic click of her rolling suitcase punctuated her steps as she weaved through the crowd. Just another traveler in the sea of people, but different in a way that mattered. She'd just landed a Boeing 787 from Singapore after fighting headwinds and managing a mechanical delay that added 2 extra hours to an already grueling flight. Her back ached. Her eyes felt heavy, yet the familiar weight of her uniform jacket pressed across her shoulders like an embrace. She was a captain, one of the few female pilots to reach this rank, and each thread in those stripes had been earned through relentless dedication. "Great landing today, Captain," her first officer, James, called out as he passed her, his own bag trailing behind him. He flashed her a tired but appreciative grin. "Smooth as silk, even with that crosswind." "Thanks, James. Get some rest, you've earned it," Anna replied, smiling back. She felt a spark of pride. Each landing was a reminder that she could navigate both the sky and the weight of others' expectations. The cockpit was her sanctuary, her battlefield, and her proof that she belonged. At a coffee shop along the way, she ordered her usual a medium dark roast. Black. The young barista with bright blue hair noticed her uniform and beamed. "Pilot's discount," she said, handing over the cup. "My sister's in flight school. Seeing you up there matters. You know?" Anna wrapped her hands around the warm cup, feeling a small smile stretch across her face. "Tell her to keep going. The view from up there is worth every minute of studying." With a nod, she moved toward her gate, her coffee warming her hands and her spirits. The anticipation of finally heading home to Denver, where her own bed awaited, gave her tired feet new life. She passed by a mother and young son, the boy's eyes widening as he pointed at her. "Mom, look, a pilot." The mother smiled, and Anna returned the look, feeling a familiar warmth settle in her chest. She had once been that kid, face pressed against airport windows, dreaming of a life above the clouds. Anna found her spot in the boarding line for pre-boarding. Thanks to the automatic upgrade her seniority had earned her, she couldn't wait to sink into her first-class seat, close her eyes, and just let the quiet hum of the engines lull her. This time, she wouldn't be at the controls, wouldn't be the one responsible for every soul on board. Just for a few hours, she'd be a passenger, drifting between moments of wakefulness and rest. As she stood in line, waiting for the gate agent to call her group, she felt the familiar shift within her, the transition from the authoritative captain to just Anna, the passenger. It was always a strange adjustment. Stepping onto a plane and turning right instead of left. Left led to the cockpit, her domain, the place where she called the shots. Right led to the cabin, where she was just one of many. She didn't mind, she enjoyed the rare quiet of not having to lead, not having to be in control. But as she neared her seat in first class, Anna noticed something, a subtle change in the atmosphere around her. People whispered, sneaking glances in her direction. A businessman a few seats over kept looking at her, curiosity flickering across his face. A young couple behind her had paused mid-conversation, and she could feel their eyes on her back. She'd felt this before 1,000 times, in 1,000 small ways. The glances, the lingering stares, the unspoken question. "Are you really supposed to be here?" Anna took a deep breath, feeling the familiar weight settle into her bones. She straightened her jacket, her fingers brushing the 4 stripes on her sleeve as if to remind herself that each one was hers. Earned through years of early mornings, endless landings, and silent, unspoken challenges. She wasn't here to explain herself. She was here to go home. And if anyone wondered, well, they'd have to keep wondering. The first-class cabin was humming with the quiet anticipation of a night flight. The passengers settling into their seats, whispering small talk, and stowing away bags. Anna sank into her seat, letting herself relax as the cushioned leather molded to her back. She adjusted her headrest, ready to finally let the fatigue slip away. But as she glanced around, she noticed a ripple of attention starting to build around her, a strange tension radiating from the nearby seats. Whispers. Quick glances. Eyes lingering just a beat too long. It was a look she knew all too well. A quiet disbelief wrapped in polite silence. Across the aisle, a businessman in a pressed gray suit kept sneaking curious glances her way. His gaze flicking to the 4 stripes on her jacket sleeve, then darting back to his phone as if embarrassed to be caught looking. Behind her, she caught the hushed voices of a young couple, their words hushed but just loud enough to make her ears prick up. "Is she a pilot?" the woman whispered, her voice laced with the confusion of someone grappling with an unexpected puzzle piece. "I didn't know. I thought." Anna let the words fade into the background, her fingers tightening slightly around the edge of her armrest. She wasn't here to answer anyone's silent questions or correct their assumptions. She'd spent enough years doing that, turning quiet stares and unspoken judgments into a silent fuel that kept her climbing higher. And yet, tonight, as fatigue draped over her like a heavy blanket, she felt the sharp edges of those looks more acutely. Each one was a tiny prick on the armor she'd spent years building. She took a steadying breath, opening her book in an attempt to lose herself in its pages. But before she could read a single word, a young, freshly pressed flight attendant stopped at her row. Her smile polite but tight, the kind worn by someone new to the job. She glanced at Anna, and her gaze lingered a moment too long on the uniform. "Excuse me, ma'am," the attendant began, her voice trained into the smooth, impersonal tone of customer service. "I'm sorry, but there seems to be some confusion with seating arrangements. This section is reserved for our first-class passengers only." Anna's fingers stilled on the pages of her book, and she felt a familiar knot form in her stomach. Her eyes flicked up to meet the flight attendant's gaze. "Yes," she replied calmly, holding out her boarding pass. "I'm in my assigned seat." The young woman's smile didn't falter, but there was a slight hesitation in her expression. "I understand," she said, still holding that practiced smile. "But perhaps, you'd be more comfortable in the main cabin. We need to keep these seats available for our premium passengers." The words settled between them like a challenge. Anna kept her face neutral, her voice steady. "I am a premium passenger," she said firmly, offering her boarding pass again. The young attendant's eyes flicked to it briefly, but the doubt remained. "Ma'am, these seats are quite expensive," she replied, her tone softening just slightly. "Perhaps there's been a mistake." Anna leaned forward, interrupting her gently but with an edge of authority that came as naturally as breathing. "I'm Captain Anna Silva," she said, her voice carrying the unshakable confidence that had seen her through thousands of hours in the cockpit. "I just finished commanding a flight from Singapore. This is my upgrade seat for my deadhead back to Denver." A silence fell over the cabin. The businessman across the aisle suddenly found his laptop fascinating, and the couple behind her grew unusually quiet. The young girl from earlier peeked over her mother's shoulder, her eyes wide with curiosity. Every eye seemed to be on Anna, yet none dared to hold her gaze. The flight attendant's face turned a deep shade of red as she finally noticed the 4 stripes on Anna's sleeve. The captain's insignia stitched onto her uniform with unmistakable authority. "Oh, I didn't realize," she stammered, her composure slipping. "I'm so sorry, Captain Silva." Anna held her expression steady, swallowing the frustration bubbling beneath the surface. "No, you didn't," she said quietly, her tone measured. She kept her gaze steady, refusing to let it waver. She had long ago learned that these moments demanded a delicate balance, a firm stance without slipping into anger. A lesson she'd been taught too many times. An older flight attendant, her name tag reading Patricia, approached, taking in the scene with a quick, assessing glance. "Is everything all right here?" she asked, her gaze flicking between the young attendant and Anna. "Just a misunderstanding about seating assignments," Anna replied, slipping her boarding pass back into her jacket. Patricia's gaze softened, recognizing Anna immediately. "Captain Silva is in her correct seat. Sarah, she's one of our senior pilots." The gentle emphasis on senior wasn't lost on anyone listening. Sarah, the young attendant, gave an embarrassed nod. "I'm so sorry, Captain," she said again, her voice barely a whisper now. "Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee?" Anna shook her head, keeping her voice even. "I'm fine, thank you." She could have said more about respect, about assumptions, about the weight of always having to explain herself. But she knew this wasn't the time or place. Not now. Not here in this cabin where every word would linger in the minds of those watching. Instead, she allowed the young woman to retreat. The first-class cabin easing back into a more familiar rhythm of quiet conversations and rustling magazines. Anna opened her book again, her eyes scanning the words without really seeing them. Her uniform, which usually felt like an extension of herself, suddenly felt heavy. Around her, passengers tried to act as if nothing had happened, but the tension still clung to the air like a fine mist. Impossible to ignore. The businessman across the aisle shifted uncomfortably, sneaking a glance her way before turning back to his laptop, guilt written plainly on his face. The young girl across the cabin continued to watch Anna, her expression now tinged with uncertainty. Anna managed a reassuring smile, hoping to ease the worry she saw in the girl's eyes. Moments like these, she reminded herself, didn't define her, they were just a part of the journey. As the remaining passengers boarded and settled, Anna took a deep breath, letting the familiar hum of the aircraft's engines steady her. She knew that she would face this again, these subtle challenges, the quiet disbelief, the unspoken questions. But tonight, sitting in the seat she'd rightfully earned, she reminded herself why she loved this job and the boundless freedom of the skies. This was where she belonged, and no one's doubt could ever take that away. The engines hummed softly, filling the cabin with a soothing rhythm as the remaining passengers boarded. Anna closed her eyes, trying to let the tension of the day slip away, but a prickling sensation reminded her that she was still the focus of curious, uneasy glances. Across the aisle, the businessman who'd stared at her earlier was pretending to read, but his eyes kept flicking in her direction, his brow furrowed as if he was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't quite add up. She settled back, pulling out her book, determined to find a moment of peace. But just as she began to read, she sensed movement nearby. Glancing up, she saw the young flight attendant, Sarah, making her way back down the aisle. This time, she was joined by Patricia, the more experienced attendant who had quietly resolved the seating issue earlier. They stopped at Anna's row, and Patricia gave her a reassuring nod. "Captain Silva," Patricia said, her tone warm but professional. "Sarah and I wanted to apologize again for the earlier misunderstanding." Anna regarded them both, her gaze calm and steady. She could see the nervous energy radiating from Sarah, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, knuckles white. Patricia's expression held more confidence, but there was an unmistakable tension in the lines around her mouth. Anna had spent years reading people, learning how to gauge the emotions behind a professional facade, and she sensed that this apology was more than a formality for them. "No need to apologize further," Anna replied, her voice even. "Mistakes happen." She could have left it there, accepted the apology and moved on, but something inside her felt unresolved. She thought about the young girl sitting a few rows back, the one who'd looked at her with awe, and the way that awe had shifted to confusion and concern during the earlier exchange. Anna wanted to protect that girl's sense of wonder, her unshakable belief that she, too, could one day sit in the cockpit. Looking at Sarah, Anna felt a surge of empathy. She remembered her own first months as a pilot, the fear of making mistakes, the constant awareness that she was one of the few women in a male-dominated field. But she also knew that sometimes, a simple apology wasn't enough. Sometimes, you had to teach people how to look beyond their assumptions. "Sarah," Anna began gently, "can I ask you something?" The young attendant nodded, her expression wary but willing. "Of course, Captain. Why did you assume I wasn't supposed to be in this seat?" Sarah's cheeks flushed a deep red, and her gaze dropped to the floor. I don't know," she stammered, glancing at Patricia for support. I didn't think." "That's exactly it," Anna said, her voice calm but firm. "You didn't think. You saw what you expected to see." A tense silence settled between them, punctuated only by the soft rustling of passengers' belongings and the distant murmur of boarding announcements. Anna let her words linger, giving Sarah a moment to absorb them. The young woman's face shifted from embarrassment to a dawning understanding, and Anna could see the realization sinking in. "I'm sorry," Sarah said again, this time with genuine remorse. I really am. I didn't mean to make you feel like you didn't belong. Anna nodded, feeling a mix of satisfaction and weariness. She could see that Sarah's apology was sincere, that the young woman was grappling with the impact of her assumptions. But Anna also knew that this moment was just one of many another small battle in a larger war that she'd been fighting her entire career. You're not the first person to make that assumption, Anna said, her voice softening, but I hope you'll be one of the last. Patricia placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. A silent show of support. Thank you, Captain Silva, Patricia said. It's not often that someone takes the time to educate. Anna gave a faint smile. But there was a heaviness to it. I didn't come here to educate, she replied quietly. I came here to go home. But sometimes, we don't get to choose when we teach. As the attendants moved on, Anna glanced across the aisle and noticed the businessman watching her. His expression unreadable. When their eyes met, he cleared his throat awkwardly, shifting in his seat. Excuse me, Captain Silva, he began, his tone tentative. I couldn't help but overhear. I just wanted to say. That was, well, I don't know if I could have handled it the way you did. Anna studied him for a moment, gauging his sincerity. She'd encountered people like him before, well-meaning, perhaps, but often oblivious to the realities that others faced. Thank you, she replied simply, hoping to end the conversation there. But the businessman leaned forward. His curiosity clearly piqued. I fly this route often, he said, almost to himself. I run a tech company, and we're always talking about diversity. But I don't think I've really understood it until now, seeing how you handled that. Anna nodded, a familiar weariness settling over her. Diversity isn't just a talking point. It's about recognizing that everyone has a right to be here, no matter who they are or where they come from. The businessman looked thoughtful, as if her words had struck a chord. He gave a slight nod, his gaze turning inward, and Anna could see that he was genuinely reflecting on what he'd witnessed. As the plane began to taxi to the runway, Anna felt the usual thrill of anticipation that came with takeoff. She glanced out the window, watching as the airport lights streaked by, her reflection superimposed over the world outside. Despite the tension and exhaustion of the day, she felt a flicker of pride, a reminder of why she'd chosen this path, why she'd fought so hard to earn her place here. As the plane lifted off, Anna let herself relax, the familiar weightlessness easing the knots in her shoulders. She glanced over at the young girl a few rows back, who was now peeking over her mother's shoulder, watching Anna with wide eyes. Anna gave her a small nod, and the girl grinned, her earlier unease replaced by a glimmer of determination. Anna settled back, letting the quiet hum of the engines lull her into a rare moment of peace. She'd handled the confrontation with grace, turned a moment of doubt into a teaching opportunity, and reclaimed her place in a world that didn't always welcome her. As the plane soared into the night sky, she felt a sense of triumph, a quiet, steady reminder that she belonged here, and no amount of assumptions or whispered doubts could ever change that. The flight had settled into a calm, familiar rhythm. Passengers leaned back in their seats, some watching movies, others slipping into that quiet, in-between state that long flights encourage. Anna tried to relax, opening her book again, but her mind kept drifting back to the confrontation with the flight attendant. The whispers, the quick glances, moments that felt small but held a heavy weight. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that she was here as a passenger, not a teacher. But tonight, it seemed that life had other plans. Excuse me, Captain Silva? Anna looked up to see the businessman from across the aisle, leaning over with an apologetic smile. I didn't mean to disturb you, but I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing a bit about your experiences. I've worked in tech for years, and we always talk about diversity and inclusion, but I'm realizing I've never truly understood it, at least not like this. He paused, his face a mix of curiosity and genuine introspection. Anna considered his words. She could see he was well-meaning, perhaps genuinely wanting to learn. She could have brushed him off, given a polite nod and returned to her book. But something about the sincerity in his voice held her attention. Maybe this conversation wouldn't change the world, but it could plant a seed, spark a shift. And sometimes, That was enough. All right, she said, closing her book and meeting his gaze. But I'll be honest, my journey has been a bit different from what you might expect. It's been challenging, rewarding, exhausting, and yes, sometimes filled with moments like what you saw earlier. The businessman nodded, leaning forward with his full attention, as if absorbing every word. I can imagine, actually. No, I can't. I'm sorry, I don't mean to assume I can understand. But I'd like to try. Anna appreciated his honesty. I get that. The truth is, it's a strange thing, carrying both pride and weight in a job that I love so deeply. There's this sense of needing to prove myself over and over. Not just as a pilot, but as a black woman in this field. She let her gaze drift to the window, where dark clouds scattered across the sky. When I started out, there weren't many people who looked like me in the cockpit. Each mistake I made was amplified, as if it was proof that I didn't belong there. She paused, her mind traveling back to her early days of flying. She remembered her first instructor, an old-school aviator with a skeptical eye, who had given her a look that said, "I'll believe it when I see it." She'd flown with him every day for weeks, each session feeling like a test that went beyond her skills. She had to be flawless. There was no room for error. Every small victory felt like climbing a mountain. She continued, and every setback felt like proof that others were just waiting for. But you keep pushing forward. Because that's how you make space for yourself and for the ones who come after you. The businessman listened intently, his brow creased in thought. I never thought about it like that. The constant need to prove yourself. He looked down, almost as if embarrassed by his own naivety. I guess that's a luxury I've always taken for granted. Anna nodded, a faint smile on her lips. It's not something that everyone thinks about. But when you're the first, or one of the few, you don't get to ignore it. You can't afford to. Just then, Sarah, the young flight attendant, appeared with the drink cart. Her movements careful and controlled as she approached Anna's row. She paused beside Anna, her eyes hesitant but earnest. "Captain Silva, would you like something to drink?" Anna sensed the tension in Sarah's posture, the slight tremble in her hand as she held the tray. It would have been easy to brush her off. But Anna knew this moment was an opportunity for something more. "What would you recommend?" she asked, her tone gentle. Sarah blinked, taken aback by the question. "Oh, our red wine is quite nice tonight. It's a California Cabernet." "That sounds perfect." Anna watched as Sarah poured the wine, her hands steadying as the small gesture of kindness bridged the uncomfortable gap between them. "How long have you been with the airline?" Anna asked, taking the glass and meeting Sarah's gaze. "Just 3 months," Sarah admitted, her cheeks coloring. I'm still learning. And I'm sorry about earlier. I made assumptions that I shouldn't have." Anna nodded, her gaze softening. "We all start somewhere, Sarah. What matters is what we learn from those moments." Sarah's face brightened, and for the first time since their initial exchange, Anna saw a genuine spark of gratitude and understanding. "Thank you," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. As Sarah moved on, Anna turned back to the businessman, who had watched the exchange with a look of fascination. He shook his head, a small smile on his face. "You turned that moment into something powerful. Not everyone would have done that." Anna shrugged, feeling a mix of humility and weariness. "In the cockpit, we call it crew resource management, making sure everyone works together effectively, regardless of rank or experience. In life, it's not so different. Sometimes, a little grace goes a long way." The businessman leaned back, a thoughtful look on his face. "You know, I've been thinking about diversity in my company for years. But I'm starting to see it in a new way now. It's not just about hiring numbers or policies, it's about changing perspectives." He glanced down at the tablet in his lap, as if seeing it with fresh eyes. "Thank you for sharing this, Captain Silva. I have a lot to think about." Anna smiled, a genuine warmth in her expression. "If we're going to change things, it starts with each of us doing the work, recognizing our biases, listening, and learning." She let her gaze drift across the cabin, where passengers were now relaxing, seemingly oblivious to the quiet revelations unfolding in row 4A. But she knew that each of them, in some small way, had felt the impact of the evening's events. As the plane continued its climb, Anna looked out at the dark sky, the stars just beginning to pierce through the clouds. She thought of all the times she'd felt isolated in her journey. All the moments she'd faced assumptions and doubts, both from herself and others. Tonight had been yet another chapter in that journey. But somehow, this moment felt different. Maybe it was the young girl who had looked up to her, the businessman who was rethinking his own assumptions, or the young flight attendant who had learned a lesson that would stay with her. Each small step mattered, Anna realized. Every conversation, every connection, these were the things that would slowly, steadily chip away at the barriers she'd spent her life navigating. As they flew deeper into the night, Anna took a sip of her wine, letting the warmth fill her chest. The businessman across the aisle gave her a small nod, his expression one of respect and quiet admiration. And for the first time in a long while, Anna felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that, tonight, she'd done more than just fly. She'd made the skies a little wider, a little more welcoming, for those who would come after her. As the cabin settled into the quiet lull of cruise altitude, the hum of the engines and dimmed lights created an atmosphere that seemed to invite reflection. Anna found herself surprisingly alert, her conversation with the businessman lingering in her thoughts. She took another sip of wine, savoring the moment, the rare opportunity to sit back and simply be. A gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. Captain Silva? Anna looked up to find Sarah standing beside her row, her expression earnest, a hint of nervousness in her posture. I hope I'm not bothering you. But would it be all right if I asked you something? Of course, Anna replied, gesturing to the empty seat beside her. Have a seat. Sarah lowered herself into the seat cautiously, as if unsure she was welcome. But Anna offered her an encouraging smile. She could see the young woman wrestling with her own thoughts, a mix of curiosity and guilt in her eyes. How do you stay so composed? Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. When people treat you unfairly. I mean, I couldn't believe the way you handled what happened earlier. If I were in your shoes, I don't know if I could do it. I'd be furious. She paused, glancing at her hands. I was embarrassed by what I did, Captain Silva. But I want to understand. Anna set her wine glass down, studying Sarah carefully. She could see the sincerity in her gaze, the genuine desire to understand something she hadn't considered before. For Anna, moments like these were both a gift and a burden, an opportunity to teach, but one that came at a personal cost. It's not about staying composed all the time, Anna began slowly. It's about choosing when and how to respond. And that's something I had to learn over the years. When I started out, every time I faced a comment or a judgment, I'd feel this anger rise up inside me. And I thought, why should I have to keep quiet? Why should I be the one to handle it with grace? Sarah nodded, her eyes wide, clearly hanging on every word. So, what changed? Experience. Mostly, Anna replied, her tone thoughtful. After a while, I realized that my energy was a resource. It's easy to let anger consume you. But anger uses up energy I need for other things. Flying takes focus, dedication, and sometimes, being in control means letting go of what doesn't serve you. But doesn't it feel unfair? Sarah asked, her voice a bit stronger now. Like you're always the one who has to be the bigger person? Anna nodded, understanding exactly what Sarah meant. Yes, it does feel unfair, and it is. But here's the thing, Sarah, every time I respond to someone's assumptions or prejudices with calmness and professionalism, I'm teaching them something. I'm showing them what a pilot looks like, what a leader looks like. I'm showing them that they were wrong to judge, without even needing to say it outright. Sarah took a deep breath, her face thoughtful. I never thought of it that way. I thought you were just, I don't know, handling it better than I ever could. But I see now it's a choice. It's a choice I've had to make countless times, Anna said, glancing down at her hands. And I don't always make it perfectly. There are times I've felt the frustration boil over. But over the years, I've learned that there's power in staying calm. It doesn't mean I don't feel the anger, it just means I channel it into something productive. Something that builds instead of tears down. The two women fell into a quiet pause, each lost in their thoughts. Around them, passengers were either asleep or absorbed in their own worlds. Oblivious to the conversation unfolding in row 4A. Anna realized that what she was sharing with Sarah was something she hadn't often said aloud. Even to herself. I suppose it's like flying through turbulence. Anna said after a moment. Choosing her words carefully. When you're in the cockpit, you're always watching for signs of rough air. You can't always avoid it. But you can prepare for it. You adjust your course. Slow down a bit. Make sure everyone's secure. Sometimes, life is a bit like that. You learn to read the signs. To anticipate the rough patches. And then you face them as best as you can. Sarah's face softened, her earlier nervousness replaced by a look of quiet admiration. I can't thank you enough for this. Captain, I've never really thought about how important those choices are. Or the impact they can have. Anna smiled, feeling a flicker of warmth at Sarah's words. We all start somewhere. You're just starting out. And you'll make mistakes along the way. What matters is that you learn from them. That you keep asking questions and challenging your own assumptions. At that moment, the businessman from earlier cleared his throat. Catching Anna's attention. Captain Silva, he said, his voice carrying a newfound respect. I just wanted to say, this has been a privilege to listen to. I'll admit, I didn't fully understand the weight of what you go through. But I think I see things a bit differently now. And I hope we can all do better. Anna regarded him thoughtfully. She could see the honesty in his eyes. The realization that he'd witnessed something he'd never really considered before. It was a small thing. Perhaps. But sometimes small shifts could lead to bigger changes. Thank you, Anna said, her voice quiet but sincere. It's not an easy journey. But the more we have conversations like this, the more we start to break down the barriers. It's all about opening minds. Little by little, the plane continued to cruise through the night. And Anna felt a strange mix of peace and purpose. She knew that Sarah and the businessman would carry this conversation with them. That the lessons shared tonight would ripple outward in ways she couldn't predict. As Sarah stood to return to her duties, she gave Anna one last, grateful look. Thank you again, Captain Silva, for everything. And with that, she turned, moving down the aisle with a newfound sense of purpose. Anna settled back into her seat, her mind whirling with the events of the evening. She'd come onto this flight hoping for a quiet trip. Just another leg of her journey home. But instead, she'd found herself at the center of something more, a moment of connection. A chance to inspire and teach. She'd done it countless times before. But tonight felt different. Tonight, she felt as though she'd not only made a difference but had also found a deeper understanding of her own strength. As she looked out the window at the dark, endless sky, a sense of calm washed over her. She was reminded of why she'd chosen this path. Why she'd fought so hard to earn her place in a world that didn't always make room for her. And tonight, she felt as if the skies had widened just a little more. Making space not just for her, but for everyone who would come after. Anna closed her eyes, finally allowing herself to rest. She felt ready for whatever the journey held, knowing that she'd keep flying high. Not just for herself, but for those who needed someone to show them it was possible. The hours passed peacefully as the plane soared through the darkness. The occasional patch of turbulence rocking the cabin in a steady, familiar rhythm. Anna remained seated, savoring the rare opportunity to relax and reflect. Her thoughts drifted to the countless flights she'd commanded, the skies she'd navigated, the moments of quiet in the cockpit where she could simply be. She closed her eyes, letting the hum of the engines wash over her, reminding her that, up here, the only expectations were her own. Just as she began to doze, the soft voice of the flight attendant, Patricia, interrupted her reverie. Captain Silva, would you care for anything else before we begin descent? Patricia's tone was warm, filled with an unspoken respect that she seemed eager to convey after witnessing the earlier incident. Anna opened her eyes and smiled gently. I'm all right, Patricia, thank you. But Patricia lingered a moment longer, her expression thoughtful. Captain Silva, I just wanted to say, the way you handled that situation earlier, it was remarkable. I've been working in this industry for over 15 years. And I've seen a lot of situations go wrong. But you, she paused, searching for the right words. You turned it into something better. Anna felt a flush of warmth at the compliment. But there was a weight to her response that she couldn't ignore. Thank you, Patricia. she said, her voice steady. I've had a lot of practice. Unfortunately. Patricia nodded, her expression a mix of sympathy and admiration. I can't imagine how exhausting that must be. Having to educate people, over and over. But tonight, well, I think you changed more minds than you know. Anna considered this, her mind drifting back to her early years in aviation. The countless times she'd swallowed her frustration, forced herself to be the bigger person, hoping that each small moment of grace might pave the way for others. And yet, there was always the question that lingered in the back of her mind. How much does one person have to endure just to be seen? It's not always easy, Anna admitted, her gaze distant. There are days when I wonder if all the small battles add up to something bigger. But then I think of the young women coming up behind me. The ones who look at the sky and dream of flying, and I know that each moment of grace is for them. 2. Patricia's face softened, a new understanding dawning in her eyes. You're paving the way, Captain. It may feel small in the moment, but the impact, it's undeniable. Anna felt a deep sense of gratitude for Patricia's words, a recognition she didn't often encounter. As Patricia moved down the aisle to check on the other passengers, Anna turned back to the window, her reflection faint against the dark expanse of night. The conversation with Sarah and the businessman replayed in her mind, a reminder of how a single exchange could shift perceptions, plant seeds of empathy in unexpected places. Just then, a small, hesitant voice caught her attention. She looked over to see Emma, the young girl from earlier, clutching the edge of her seat, her face a mixture of awe and curiosity. Her mother was gently scolding her to sit down, but Emma's eyes were fixed on Anna, filled with a sense of wonder that only children possess. Excuse me, Emma whispered, her gaze shy but determined. Are you really a pilot? Anna smiled, her heart warming at the girl's earnestness. Yes, I am. I've been flying planes for many years now. Emma's eyes widened. I want to be a pilot, too, but, she hesitated, glancing down at her shoes. But my friend at school said girls can't be pilots. Anna felt a familiar pang, an echo of her own childhood, of the first time someone had told her that certain dreams were too big, too impossible. She leaned forward, meeting Emma's gaze with a steady, reassuring look. Your friend is wrong, Emma. Girls can be pilots. They can be anything they want to be. Emma's face lit up, her eyes sparkling with a new conviction. Really? Really? Anna affirmed. It doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. If you love flying, if it's what you want to do, then nothing can stop you. Emma's mother offered Anna a grateful smile, a silent thank you that needed no words. Anna returned it, feeling a renewed sense of purpose settle over her. It was moments like these, small and simple, that reminded her why she kept going, why she endured the unending expectations and assumptions. For Emma and for every young girl who would look up at the sky and wonder if they belonged there. 2. As Emma settled back in her seat, Anna noticed Sarah watching from a few rows back, her face soft with admiration. When their eyes met, Sarah gave her a small, respectful nod. The look held a depth of understanding, as if Sarah, too, now saw the skies through a slightly different lens. The captain's voice came over the PA system, announcing their descent into Denver. Around her, passengers began to stir, securing bags and checking their seatbelts. Patricia passed by one last time, giving Anna a final nod of respect, her expression one of genuine gratitude. Thank you for everything, Captain Silva, Patricia whispered, and Anna knew she wasn't just talking about the flight. Anna acknowledged her with a small smile, the kind that spoke volumes without saying a word. She knew that the lessons shared tonight would linger, not just with Sarah and Patricia, but with Emma and even the businessman who had listened with such rapt attention. In a way, she'd woven herself into the fabric of their lives. A quiet reminder that strength and grace could coexist. That one didn't need to diminish the other. As the plane descended through the clouds, Anna felt a sense of calm settle over her. She knew the journey wasn't over, that there would be more moments like this, more conversations, more silent battles. But tonight, she felt at peace, knowing that she'd done her part to widen the sky, to make room for those who would follow. The city lights of Denver twinkled below, a glittering tapestry that welcomed her home. She could already imagine the quiet drive from the airport, the familiar comfort of her own bed, the simple joy of being herself without the weight of expectation. But she also knew that tomorrow, she would put on her uniform again, carry herself with the same quiet confidence, and take to the skies once more, not just for herself, but for every dreamer who needed to know that the sky was big enough for everyone. As the plane touched down, Anna felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had flown countless miles, conquered endless storms, but tonight's journey had been one of the most meaningful yet. The plane rolled to a gentle stop at the gate, and as the cabin lights brightened, the hum of anticipation filled the air. Passengers reached for bags, murmuring goodbyes and gathering their belongings, eager to step out into the crisp Denver air. Anna remained seated, allowing herself a moment to watch the familiar shuffle of people. She felt the weight of everything that had unfolded during the flight, the quiet confrontations, the conversations, the connections that had shifted something deeper within her. As she waited, the businessman from earlier, a tall, thoughtful-looking man named David, made his way over to her row. He held his bag in one hand, but his other hand was extended, a business card between his fingers. His face was earnest, his eyes reflecting a newfound respect. "Captain Silva," he began, his tone softer than it had been earlier. "I just wanted to thank you. You've given me a lot to think about. I realized that back at my company, we talk a lot about diversity, but maybe we're not really doing enough. Hearing you tonight, it's changed my perspective. I'd like to invite you to speak at one of our events. I think people would benefit from hearing what you shared with me." Anna took the card, her fingers brushing the embossed text. She could feel the sincerity in his offer, but beneath it lay a familiar weight, the responsibility of educating, of sharing her experiences for the benefit of others. She'd encountered this request before, the subtle expectation that she turn her challenges into teachable moments for others, often at the cost of her own energy and peace. "Thank you, David," she said, her voice polite but measured. "I'll think about it." David's expression shifted slightly, as if he understood the nuance in her words. "Of course, I understand if you don't have the time or energy, but if you ever feel like sharing, know that it would make a difference." He offered her a nod of respect before stepping away, leaving her with the small square of paper that felt heavier than it looked. Anna turned the card over in her hand, contemplating his words. She knew that speaking about her experiences could open doors for others, could create waves of awareness and change. But she also knew the toll it took, the feeling of vulnerability that came with sharing her story for others' enlightenment. As the last few passengers filtered out, Patricia and Sarah approached her one final time. Sarah's face was different now, more confident, more self-assured, a small smile breaking across her lips. "Captain Silva, thank you again," Sarah said, her voice carrying a newfound strength. "I learned more from you tonight than I've learned in months of training. You've given me a lot to think about, and I promise, I'll do better." Anna nodded, seeing the genuine change in Sarah's eyes. It was a reminder that sometimes, change started with just one person, one mind opened, one perspective shifted. "I'm glad to hear that, Sarah. Remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about being willing to see people for who they are, not just who you expect them to be." Sarah's eyes softened, and Patricia placed a hand on her shoulder, giving her a warm smile. "You've been a mentor tonight, Captain," Patricia said. "Whether you meant to or not, you've shown us all something important, and I think it's going to stay with us." Anna felt a wave of humility wash over her. She'd come onto this flight as a passenger, hoping for rest, for solitude, for the rare chance to simply exist without expectation. But it seemed that life had other plans. She couldn't help but wonder if these moments of connection, these conversations, were just as much a part of her journey as the countless hours she'd spent in the cockpit. The flight attendants excused themselves as the final announcement came over the PA, welcoming passengers to Denver and bidding them a pleasant stay. Anna gathered her belongings, her thoughts still swirling as she stood up to disembark. As she stepped into the jet bridge, she heard a soft voice call out, "Captain Silva." She turned to see the young girl, Emma, standing with her mother at the entrance, her eyes still wide with admiration. Emma's mother gave Anna a grateful smile. "Thank you for inspiring her. I don't think she'll ever forget meeting a real pilot. You've shown her something important tonight. Anna crouched down to meet Emma's gaze. The little girl's face lit with the kind of wonder that was so pure. So hopeful. Emma, Anna said gently, remember what I told you. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't be a pilot. The sky is big enough for you. And for anyone who dreams of flying. Emma nodded, her eyes bright with determination. I'll remember, Captain Silva. I want to be just like you. Anna felt a knot form in her throat. The kind of emotion that words couldn't capture. She straightened, offering Emma a smile, and watched as the little girl turned away with her mother, already chattering excitedly about her dream of flying. As Anna stepped out into the terminal, the weight of the day began to lift, replaced by a sense of clarity. She thought about the countless others who had come before her, the pioneers who had faced obstacles far greater than hers, carving a path for future generations. She was part of a long line of dreamers and doers, a part of something much bigger than herself. With renewed purpose, Anna pulled out David's business card and slid it into her jacket pocket. Her decision made, she would share her story not for the accolades or the recognition, but for people like Emma, for young women who would one day look at the sky and feel as if they belonged there. The world was changing, albeit slowly, and she realized that every small act of grace, every moment of patience, was part of that shift. Anna walked through the terminal, the fluorescent lights reflecting off her captain's stripes, each step carrying the quiet strength she'd built over years of dedication. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, that there would be more conversations, more assumptions to overcome, but tonight, she felt ready to face it all, fueled by the reminder that every moment of grace was a call to action, a small but powerful contribution to a world that was slowly, steadily, opening its arms to everyone who dreamed of the skies. As she stepped into the cool Denver air, a new sense of determination filled her. She was ready to keep fighting, to keep flying, and to keep teaching, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. For herself, for Emma, and for everyone who dared to look up and believe in their own limitless potential. The Denver air was brisk and refreshing as Anna stepped out of the terminal. Her uniform jacket pulled snug against the chill. Her car was parked just a short walk away, waiting to take her the final stretch of her journey back home. Yet tonight, each step felt significant, the cool air sharpening her thoughts, clarifying the purpose she'd rediscovered during the flight. As she reached her car, Anna took a moment to look up at the sky, clear and scattered with stars. It was a sky she'd known intimately for years, one she'd seen from thousands of miles up, above clouds and turbulence, where everything felt both grand and small. Tonight, it looked as vast as her dreams once had and as close as her journey had brought her. She took a deep breath, feeling the crispness of the air, and let her mind settle on the events of the evening. She felt a kind of peace mixed with purpose, a reminder that every small step she took could ripple out, changing things in ways she might never fully see. Driving home, Anna thought of Emma's bright eyes, the young girl's determination to become a pilot, the inspiration that had flickered to life during their brief conversation. She thought of Sarah, too, the young flight attendant whose assumptions had given way to new awareness. And David, who now wanted to turn words into actions back at his company. Each of them represented something Anna had hoped for, the next step in a journey she'd helped carve. A future made more inclusive, more welcoming. When she reached her building, the familiar sight of her neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, greeted her from the balcony. She gave Anna a cheerful wave, her cigarette glowing faintly in the night. Ah, Captain Silva, back from saving the skies again. Are you? Anna chuckled, feeling a surge of gratitude for the small comforts of home. Back for now, Mrs. Rodriguez. Just another day up there. The older woman leaned on her balcony rail, smiling. Well, you're the only captain I know. And I tell everyone about you. They all say, wow, really? A female pilot? And I just tell them, yes, and she flies better than the rest of them. She gave a hearty laugh, filling the night air with warmth. Anna returned the smile, feeling the reassurance of Mrs. Rodriguez's words sink in. Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez. That means more than you know. She let herself into her apartment, where the comforting warmth and stillness welcomed her back. Her cat, Luna, was waiting at the door, meowing with feigned outrage over her absence. Anna scooped her up, stroking her soft fur as she made her way into the living room. The quiet solitude of home felt like a balm after the intensity of the flight. She could finally shed the expectations, the weight of her uniform, and just be herself. After unpacking her bag and freshening up, she sank into her favorite chair with a cup of tea, letting her body relax into the familiar contours of her home. She checked her phone, where a few unread messages awaited her. The first was from her mother, who'd left a voicemail about dinner plans for the weekend, her voice filled with the warmth and strength that had always grounded Anna. Then, there was a text from Sarah, thanking her once more, saying that their conversation had inspired her to approach her job with new eyes. Anna replied with a short, heartfelt message, and as she set her phone down, she realized how the night had marked a shift not only for the people she'd encountered, but for herself. She thought back to David's invitation to speak, to share her experiences with his company, and she felt herself leaning toward a quiet yes. Maybe it was time to embrace her role as both pilot and teacher, not out of obligation, but out of choice. Her eyes drifted to the window, where the stars shone brightly, and a sense of calm washed over her. She knew that life would continue to present her with challenges, moments that tested her patience and resolve. But tonight, she felt ready, equipped with a renewed strength, a clarity of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She took a sip of her tea, savoring the warmth, and thought of all the people she'd cross paths with in the flights to come. She'd meet more young women like Emma, eager and undeterred. She'd encounter others like Sarah, who needed a gentle nudge to see beyond their assumptions. And maybe, just maybe, she'd find herself in more conversations with leaders like David, who were ready to open doors for others. As she finished her tea, a text came through from David himself. He thanked her once more, this time more personally, sharing that he'd brought up the need for real, meaningful change in his company's leadership meeting. He promised to keep her updated, adding that if she ever did decide to speak at one of their events, he'd be honored. Anna felt a quiet satisfaction as she read his words, sensing that her influence was already making an impact. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel the pride that came with not just being a captain, but a role model, a mentor for those who needed to see that they, too, could soar. She was making her mark in the sky, not just as a pilot, but as a force for change. Setting her phone aside, she stood up, feeling a newfound lightness in her step. She walked over to her jacket, hanging by the door, her captain's stripes catching the dim light. She ran her fingers over them, feeling the years of hard work, the countless takeoffs and landings, the many moments of quiet resilience stitched into each line. These stripes represented more than rank, they represented every dream she'd ever chased, every challenge she'd overcome. She took one last look out the window at the stars, feeling as if the vast night sky was reaching back to her, ready to embrace her once again. Tomorrow, she would put on her uniform, step back into the cockpit, and continue her journey with a little more purpose, a little more resolve. She'd fly with the knowledge that she was part of something larger than herself, a legacy of courage, a testament to those who believed that the sky truly was big enough for everyone. Anna turned off the lights and made her way to bed, her heart filled with a sense of quiet triumph. She had come home tonight not just to rest, but to reflect, to gather strength for the flights ahead. And as she drifted into sleep, she carried with her the hope that one day, the world would finally see the skies as she did, boundless, open, and welcoming to all who dared to dream.